Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another installment of Black and Beautiful Chit Chat Connections. Today, we are talking about fight the power. Yes, fight the power. What does that mean? Where does it come from? We're going to get into all of that. But I have a wonderful guest here with me today, and his name is Vvdaul. Look, I was about to call you Rashard. Vvdaul Holloway. Vvdaul is, I'm going to give a little bit of introduction for you, but I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself. Before we go into that, though, shameless social media plug. You will always see our link tree in the description below. You can click on that link and pick your poison. We have a page for every platform. So if you prefer Facebook, like us on Facebook. If you prefer IG, Instagram, that's my favorite. Follow us on Instagram. We have learning sessions where we provide, different types of information as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, justice, and belonging. And so if you like Twitter, follow us on Twitter. Sometimes I tweet some things, imanaborenainc, we're just out here. We're just trying to create this platform. So we're thankful. And if you can, please hit that subscribe button so that you know when our new videos are coming. We're here every Sunday at 8 p.m. for season 1. Season 1 is coming to a close. So yeah, just shameless plug. Hit that link tree in the description box. Hit that subscribe button. And be a part of our journey. Be a part of the Black and Beautiful family, okay? So back to you, Vvdaul. Vvdaul, I'm gonna give a little bit of like I said, but I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. So Vvdaul really was a colleague that I met who turned into a friend, right? It was like really organic, just came about. And one of the reasons why we connected is because we connect on this diversity, equity, and inclusion vibe as it pertains to higher education and access and success for young people who come from historically ignored groups. So we met at Bates College and it was like an immediate connection. I can't even, sometimes we're just like, this had to have been divine. But it is morning time where you are, correct? Like you're joining us from across the country in Oregon. I'm gonna stop there. I just want you to know you're a beloved friend and colleague, someone who is a Jedi and belonging leader of tomorrow. And I am like so psyched to have you on my podcast to talk about power. Like, this is crazy. Fight the power. Vvdaul, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Good morning, fight the power. So my name, like you said, Vvdaul Holloway, originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. But like you pointed out, we met at Bates, and I'm currently out here on the West Coast repping Portland, Oregon. I love Black community. Like I love the fact that you can go anywhere in the world and find a way to connect to Blackness. And that's really what's kind of inspired my journey through this work. And I'm excited to be a part of your journey with imanaborenainc and this wonderful opportunity to be on this podcast to talk about power, because I think that's really a central root to a lot of the issues that we see in DEI and Jedi fields. So I won't take up too much space with that introduction. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hold on. Like, this is a professional platform with an authentic twist. And I have to be authentic because I know it's hard to like brag about yourself, but I want you to brag about yourself. First of all, Little Rock, Arkansas is a staple as it pertains to what Jedi looks like in education. And you actually went to a high school that embodies that change in this country. So give us a little bit about that. Like, what am I talking about?
Sure. Since we're gonna go there, so
we have to.
I'm a graduate of the illustrious Little Rock Central High School, which you may know as the legacy of the Little Rock Nine and desegregation in American public schools in 1957 with the decision of Brown versus the Board of Education. So I really have been inspired by that legacy of grandness and Black excellence from the time of being a high school student. And that really inspired my journey through undergrad and then professionally, where I did AmeriCorps Vista in DC which was my first time living in a quote unquote chocolate city. And that's when it was like, oh my gosh, Black people are out here.
I know,
But
right?
then it also was like, oh my gosh, the issues of the Black community trying to thrive. And that's really where my profession kind of kicked off from there was DC, New Mexico. We met in Maine and then out here on the West Coast. So it has been a constant push towards that, both professionally and academically. I did just finish my second master's degree. So your boy is a double master of art, master of science. We out here. So, I really wanted to make sure that I'm antagonizing the issues of educational attainment from historical narratives and a policy lens. So that was really the way I took the approach with 2 graduate degrees. And it's been pivotal to my lens professionally, but also it's been good for my personal growth. So connecting back to being that little boy from Little Rock to now being a grown man in Portland, it's kind of been a full circle journey.
That's why I had to bring that up, because I feel like there's somebody out there who has to hear that story. There's a young man, a young woman who comes from, they're rooted in historical context as it pertains to how Black folks or, underrepresented communities, ignored communities in this country navigate. And perhaps they're in a space where they feel stuck and they don't necessarily know what's the next step. And so your story and your journey just shows us that, your education is very important. Your lens is very important. Your history as an individual, your history as a family is very important. And that can catapult you into your destiny, into your future. Trust in the process is very, very important. And so I always admire you because I'm like, wow, this gentleman went to a school that literally changed education for all of us, and so what kind of policies were you exposed to? What kind of conversations were you exposed to? And then you see 2 master's degrees, then onto a doctorate later, those conversations shaped why you're passionate about Black student success. And I just love that. I love that. So, okay, you introduced yourself. We bigged you up because you're so amazing. I don't think you guys understand. I really, really am so psyched to have y'all on this podcast. You guys don't even understand. I've been talking to him about this podcast probably for like a year now. Like, I've been like, you're going to be on my podcast. You're going to be on my podcast. And I finally have you here. So I want to go into Fight the Power. Tonight's webisode is called Fight the Power. So I don't know if you guys ever heard that song, Fight the Power. Fight the powers that be. Fight the power. You know what I'm saying? Like, I grew up in the 80s, early 90s. I'm dating myself. I don't care. I'm seasoned, all right? I grew up in the 80s, early 90s, early 2000s, and this song was like a very, very popular song. Flavor Flav had his big clock, but it was not only socially charged, but it was justice focused, right? And so the artists were called Public Enemy. And, I wanted to read some lyrics, but I also said to myself, I was like, let's talk about what was happening at the time and why the song was made. So Fight the Power is a song by Public Enemy, and it was released in the summer of 1989 by Motown Records. And it was conceived at the request of a film director by the name of Spike Lee. And as we know, Spike Lee has been writing our stories for so long. I mean, give this man his flowers right now, okay? Shout out to Spike Lee for being an innovator, writing our stories along with Robert Townsend, Keenan Ivory Wayans. I mean, there are so many amazing people who have been writing our stories even before we had been fighting to say that we don't have enough of our stories. So I want to also give that respect to those who have been doing it even during a time where it wasn't as popular. And so he sought a musical theme for his 1989 film called Do the Right Thing. So I don't know if you guys know, but in a lot of rap lyrics, so it's like, do the right thing like Spike Lee, right? And then, so that's where that's from. So the movie Do the Right Thing, Fight the Power was conceived by Public Enemy, but it was a remake to an Isley Brothers song that was made in the 70s. in the late 70s. And there was a challenge. They were like, okay, we want to remake this song with the same context, but for a different genre. Because as we know, the Ozzy Brothers are R&B group, you know, so they're like, fight the power, you know, they're not screaming on the record, especially during a time when rap music was birthed and used as a means to describe the oppression that was people were facing in their communities, Black and brown communities. And so, excuse me, guys, I got really excited. Let me drink some water. I get really excited about these things, so forgive me. You know, when like it goes down the wrong way. So nevertheless, the Do the Right Thing movie, Spike Lee wanted a song that reflected the central conflict of the movie. And the central conflict was there was a character named Bugging Out, and he would frequent this pizza shop. And he demanded that Sal's Pizza, Sal put up pictures of famous Black figures on his restaurant's wall of fame. He demanded representation at this pizza shop that he frequented. And that was a central conflict of the movie, which birthed the song Fight the Power. So he was fighting for representation, demanding representation in 1989. And here we are, fast forward 2021, going into 2022, and we're fighting for the same exact things. And I found that to be really profound. So like, Vvdaul, talk to me a little bit about that. Like knowing that story, that historical context of the song, knowing the words, Do the Right Thing, being like a cultural phenomena. What are your thoughts?
My first thought is like the iconic scene where like the fight breaks out, like, and how unfortunately how replicable that scene is each decade since that movie has come out. Like we've seen that scene. We see it like summer 2020 was that scene. And I think about how power, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but I just think about the relationship to power and position and how unfortunately Black community's position has not changed much since 1989. And so we are still having these same conversations of power and privilege and the demand of representation. And it's gone from music to politics and now to protest to the point where like you can't silence that movement. Like whether it's through DEI in a professional sense or DEI in a musical sense, you're gonna hear that. Fight the Power is resonant through all things Black at this point. So that's what I think of when I think of especially that movie and the iconic, like the fight has now started. Ain't no squashing this fire now.
No. Unless there's actual change. Unless we have transformational, radical change, this fight will not dissipate. It will not stop. We will continue to push and push and push and demand until there's efficacy.
Yes.
You know, and the ability for people to navigate and thrive in spaces instead of being harmed. The reduction of harm needs to happen. And I feel like the eradication of oppressive structures, I mean, to me, they're old. You know, young people, you know, we work with young people. So Vvdaul is in higher education, so was I. Matter of fact, you have transitioned out of higher education, correct?
I have.
And you are in philanthropy.
Crazy, right?
I think it's amazing. I feel like what better professional who champions and embodies what Black student success looks like, what better professional to work in philanthropy and actually drive some of those initiatives so the money goes to places that are actually trying to engage in transformational change. You know, I feel like a lot of the times we're in spaces where people are just replicating, like you said, and perpetuating the same systemic cycles to continue in the oppression. Mainly because I feel like people are afraid to push back. Like, who wants the fight to break out? But the fight already broke out, like you said.
Exactly.
It already broke out.
Yeah, the fight started. Like, it's you jumping in or you filming. What are you doing to help sustain it at this point?
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to move into the agenda for today. I wanted us to just talk about why we chose Fight the Power and, just tying things in. I'm all about tying things in. I don't ever want to leave you guys confused or, not being able to comprehend or not being able to understand how we are processing the information that we're receiving on this platform. So I wanted to give you guys a little background as to why Fight the Power. So our agenda today is going to be, we're going to talk about Fight the Power. We're going to break down what power is from a social justice lens. And then we're going to speak truth to power. And we're going to talk about what that means and how to use your voice, how to utilize your voice as an individual. And then we're going to fight the powers that be. And we're going to read a lyric from Mystery of Iniquity by Lauryn Hill, and we're going to reflect, and we're going to talk about deconstructing power, the utopia of Jedi and belonging, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because I also want to put in a plug. If you are watching this for the first time, if you have been on this platform for the first time, this is your first encounter with us, please go to our first episode, because we do kind of like a social justice one-on-one, a Jedi and belonging one-on-one, where we talk about terms that we use on this platform, so that you're not lost, okay? And if you ever need anything, like I said, click the link tree in our description box, and you can email us and contact us on any one of our social media sites. So we thank you for that. So like I said, we're gonna have our agenda today is fight the power, speaking truth to power, and fight the powers that be. So we're gonna fight the power. So what is power? Now, I was going to ask you, I'm going to ask you what you believe power is, right? And before we go into that, I'm going to give some definitions that I researched so that we can have kind of like a juiciness to, not that you wouldn't give juiciness or I wouldn't give juiciness, but, give people some strategies on how to navigate this language when they're Googling online, right?
Well,
so I want to go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just saying it's relevant to give definitions because, I know I say this all the time, but words have meaning, words matter. And so there's always a difference between denotation and connotation, contextual definitions versus written definitions. So I think it's critical that you provide both in a situation where we're about to get into some very nuanced topics. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Listen, I appreciate you. This man is a genius, guys. I don't think you guys understand. This man can write you out of the water. This man has a vocabulary that it's as large as this universe. You are amazing. Thank you for breaking that down for us. That is extremely important for us to know, gives us context, right? All right, so what is power? So according to the YWCA of Boston, and I found that their website was generally, credible. They had a shared language glossary. So at Imanaborenainc, one of the things that we talk to organizations about is the need for a shared language institutionally. So everybody needs to be on one accord on one page. And that's why Vvdaul and I are saying we need to understand definitions, go back and learn these terms, because the shared language is essential to move these things forward, these initiatives forward. It's imperative for you to understand why this terminology is being used in this way. So the YWCA of Boston had a shared language glossary, and they said power derives from politics. So I wanted to put this out there. Now, we're not going to talk about politics today, but I am going to give you the definition of politics so that you can further understand what power means. So politics is the struggle for or over power. So as you can see, we have the Democrats, we have the Republicans in America. And I talk about America because this is where I reside. And the Democrats and the Republicans are always fighting for the House, or fighting for the Senate. Who has more power, right? That's politics. And the struggle to attain and maintain, build, or take the power. So when we see the Democrats and the Republicans fighting back and forth, this is what they're doing. They're struggling over the power, They want to attain it, maintain it, build it, and take it. The goal is to ensure that their ideologies get passed on from election to election, right? So that while they're attaining and maintaining and building, they're slowly and gradually attaining more and more power and gaining more and more territory, okay? And that's really how our country has become a superpower in the world. But I don't know if you want to talk more about this, Vvdaul, because I know you love politics. This is your thing. I don't want to move on too quickly without giving you an opportunity to respond.
I think the only thing I would say about that definition is, again, understanding the nuance of language. So when we use a term to define a term, you almost have to take a step back and say, well, why was that the case? And so when you look at a word like power and it's being defined as the process of politics, politic making, and then you have to look up the definition of politics, what you find is this trail of positionality. And it's really a narrative of who has the ability to control the masses. So we say politics to make it sound nice, but really American politics is rooted in control. So that's what I would
don't go too far. Don't go too far. Don't go too far.
So I just want to put that out there to your audience. Like it's
telling you guys, this man is a genius. Don't go too far. Don't pass it, because now we're going to go into power, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk to us about that, because I know we're going to talk about power and positionality, right? We're going to talk about power and position as it pertains to Jedi and what that looks like as it plays out in organizations or plays out interpersonally between people. So we know that politics is a means to gain power, gain more territorial power. And power itself, as a derivative of politics, is the ability to name or define, the ability to decide, the ability to set the rule, standard, or policy, the ability to change the rule, standard, or policy to serve your own needs, wants, or desires, and the ability to influence decision makers to make choices in favor of your cause, issue, or concern. Now finish what you were saying, Vvdaul, because I think we laid a foundation for the understanding of your perspective.
So just to kind of connect to the definition you just read, there's again another nuance here that's missing. It's this idea of absolute and relative power. Mm-hmm. So that relative power is about our one-to-one relationships with one another within a space, but that absolute power is to influence policy decisions and outcomes. Like we can all day talk about our relative power to one another, which again, that's the positionality talk. But that absolute power, which dictates our daily lives, is that swept under the rug that we don't even really think about, because we're more so centered on ourselves and our own communities and our day-to-day lives. So that's just the nuance I would offer for that definition as well.
Guys, the intrapersonal versus the interpersonal communications. Like people really can't get outside of the interpersonal to get into systemic structures because they're so focused on their immediate connections, not even understanding that there's system structures, policies, and procedures that you are 100% engaging in every single day.
Every moment of your day.
Every moment of the day, 24/7, 365. Yeah. And so I'm glad that you were able to break that down for us in that way. And so that takes me into, and this conversation is flowing very nicely, it takes me into the types of power, right, that exist as it pertains to social justice and as we're talking about politics, power, positionality, things like that. So first is personal power exists, and that's self-determination. And that's power that an individual possesses, right? So you can build your own personal life, your own interpersonal relationships. And I feel like this is where people, this is where a lot of people reside. They care about their interpersonal relationships. They're building their personal life. This is where those comments such as pick yourself up by your bootstraps happens, and resilience, and, oh, my family was poor, and all the different excuses as to why others can't be like them. Right.
And on the flip side of that, I know on one of their previous conversations about networking. Networking is your personal power as well. Yes. So I wanted to plug one of your previous sessions that I checked.
With Anthony Harrison, yes, he came.
I was like Ariane, but
you have to call him Anthony. He is on his way to law school. Yes, so he's going to be Esquire soon. So we have to call him by his professional name. But yes, networking is your personal power, or leveraging your personal power. You know, but as it pertains to social justice, I feel like your personal power can be used in different ways. And this is where the next step is whether or not you have privilege. Now that's a different conversation, right? But, you know, just laying the foundation. Today, we're going to focus on just laying the foundation. We could put on our scuba gear and get deep, but I feel like we're not going to get as deep today because this conversation, like you said, is extremely nuanced. So this is part one of many. So social power is the next one. And this is communal self-determination, right? It's a grassroots collective of an organization of people with personal power, right? It's like power in social groups, and they build the power among themselves to determine and shape the collective. Now, I know you work with these types of individuals. So would you like to give us an example of what social power is?
Oh man, yeah, like in my current work, I'm fortunate enough to work with a Black Student Success Network, which right now we're 24 organizations strong across the state of Oregon, Black-led orgs doing the great work. But that's community social power. Like we created a learning community and a collective for the exact purpose of looking at ways to improve Black student success in the state of Oregon. And what that really does is create a feedback loop for the Black community as a whole in locales, but then also nationally. And it creates a conversation on personal power when we look at minute issues of like financial literacy, which also improves our community power. So it's really what you're saying is kind of like a scaffolding, is you want to get yourself together to build the community, get the community together to uplift the wider masses and the nation and the collective of all people.
Absolutely. Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to scaffold it so people understand where do you hold your power and how can you utilize your power. But we're going to talk about speaking truth to power later in our voices. So let's just continue laying the bricks. We're laying the bricks right now, and we're putting the concrete on top. We're laying the bricks and we're putting the concrete. So we went from personal power to social power. And now we're going to talk about my favorite one, institutional power. And right? You got to flip your head for institutional power. So like we said, now I don't mean to offend anybody when I say that people are stuck in, personal power. And then when they get together, they get into social power, and then that can be exclusive in its nature. It really can. But we're going to stay on the positive because we see how social power can be used to drive initiatives and lobby for policy change in communities and for state legislature, which is amazing. That's what you're working on, correct? All right. So now we're going to talk about how that drives institutional power. And institutional power is the power to create and shape the rules, policies, and actions of an institution. And to have institutional power is to be a decision maker or to have great influence on a decision maker of an institution. So talk to me a little bit. Would you like to give an example of institutional power or talk a little bit about institutional power? Because I don't want to just put you on the spot, but this one is my favorite.
Well, I'll chime in first and then let you take it up, since I know this is something you're really passionate about. I will speak from my personal experience on institutional power. I am an alum of AmeriCorps Vista. I did my Vista year in DC. So one of the first things you learn very quickly is It is great to work in nonprofits. It is great to work in community development. Communities don't actually get developed unless laws and policies shift. You know, you can do all you want to care and love about something. If you're not on Capitol Hill pushing, if you're not actually changing an institution, unfortunately, you just given a lot of love, and that's dope. Love is great, but policy. Mm-hmm. And so what I'll say about institutional changes, it's absolutely imperative to actually finishing your earlier definition of power, which is the ability to maintain. See, it's one thing to take and to have, but to maintain is that institutional power. And it's really incumbent on especially marginalized communities to understand that piece of the work. It's not just enough to build your own personal and social power. You must also influence institutions to reflect that power that you gain for yourself. That's all I'll say about that.
Listen, we are on the same page. Excuse me. This is why institutional power is my favorite. This is what birthed Imanaborenainc is about, addressing institutional power. And the next power that we're going to talk about as well. But institutional power is where we shape the rules, the policies, and the actions of individuals. And when we say we're shaping the actions of institutions, we're shaping the policies and procedures of the individuals that are carrying them out. And so either we're giving people the opportunity to harm, or we're reducing the harm by addressing the policy and the procedure and its lack of equity. This is where Imanaborenainc takes hold of, you know, creating that comprehensive plan for organizations, right? That comprehensive plan for individuals who are interested in executive coaching. What does that look like for me? How do I strategize on assessing policy and procedure so that I can then assess the system and the structure? Who do I go to for that institutional power? Who are the decision makers? And are they in line with Jedi and belonging? Are they in line with equitable policies? Are they in line with equitable procedures? And most importantly, are they inclusive in their approach? Meaning, are they bringing in the community? Are they bringing in those who are being affected by their non-inclusive practices to provide that feedback, right? And this is where I'm coming from the Jedi lens and belonging, Jedi and belonging lens, because I feel like it's extremely important for people to understand that. But I'll give you another example just to make it a little less confusing. So if we take a school district, right? The principal has institutional power over the local school that the principal oversees, or the superintendent oversees, right? Because there are some that give the principal all that power, and then there are some that provide the superintendent with that power. Now the principal has the local institutional power. But the education department that oversees, or the district that oversees that school, has the educational power of the entire district, right? And so you have to know the difference. And this is where voting matters. This is where understanding who your councilmen are. This is where understanding who runs the policy making in your community. I can go and complain to the principal, but if it's a district issue, I need to take it up a level, right? And so you have to understand where the institutional power lies, excuse me. You have to understand where the institutional power lies. And I feel like, you know, coupled with your perspective, Vvdaul, and providing these examples, I hope that it gives you a little bit of insight so that you could do that extra needed research so that you can further understand what these terminologies mean and how they're used as a means to provide more equitable spaces for people. So institutional power, institutional influence is very important. Another thing, for example, the latter part of the definition about having institutional power is to have great influence upon the maker of the institution. And so what we're finding is we're seeing that big tech, big pharma, and all of these industries have a large influence over our policymakers, and they pay our policymakers to align with their ideologies and how they want to see policies made in this country. So they have institutional power as well, based off of, their economic standing in America, being that they are like large corporations that bring in most of our economic resources. And so we have to understand that too. And so when you're going up against these big machines, I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch Emotional Well-Being and Safety. We went over a term called Henryism, and it was two legends, both named John Henry, who went up against the machine, which was, systemic structures that were oppressing their, people like them. And they went up against it and they got sick from doing it, right? And they died and they had all these complications. And there was a study that was done that showed that people who are under these excessive amounts of pressure then have, physical and emotional health issues. And so we have to understand, when you break it down, you know what you're up against and you know what you need. If I know that I need to go up against institutional power, that means that I need social capital and power in order to fight that. I can't do that as a personal power. Not that you can't, you can, but you run the risk of perhaps being under immense amounts of pressure and feeling defeated. But if you have more people with you and you have this social capital, this social power, you can fight against this institutional power. And I mean, this is my platform. I'm all about fight the power, like I'm going from that perspective. Not everything is bad. Not everyone is bad. There are people who utilize their institutional power in an equitable, righteous way, and we salute those people. But for the purposes of Jedi and belonging, for the purposes of having this conversation about fight the power, I do want us to recognize how we can utilize our power as we start to develop a scaffold today. Vvdaul, do you have anything else to say? I feel like I went on like a little rant because I get so passionate about this stuff.
I think you captured it. I would like to add again, I'm all about the nuance of language. So I would like to add a little piece to that, which is, yes, as an individual in your personal power, you can go up against these institutions. Historically, that does not play well, but we have examples of it being successful. But I will say, when you're building community and social power, I'm just going to say a phrase, leave it out there, let it float. Remember that all skin folk are not kinfolk when building collective social power. Just going to put that out there. Just pivot real quick on it. But maybe there'll be a different podcast and we'll talk about that. But just know that in building any type of collective power, you must be aware that all skin folk and kinfolk, Blackness is not monolithic, and so everybody is not aligned on the same goals. So make sure that when you're building that social power, it's actually in alignment of the goals that you see as progressing the community, not stagnating in a space of upholding a particular power structure that benefits you. I'll just put that out there.
Well said, my brother. If I had a like, I would just like, okay, listen, you heard it from Vvdaul. Follow instructions, that's it. So we're gonna move into, I'm just saying, follow instructions. This is from someone who sees it firsthand. Same thing with me. We've seen some things, and well, as we go on, we continue on this journey on this podcast, some stories are gonna come out about these social structures and people who insist on upholding oppressive structures for their own benefit. And more than just white folks benefit from oppressive structures. Let's just say that. So structural power, that brings us to the next one. Structural power. So to have structural power is to create and shape rules, policies, and actions that govern multiple and intersecting institutions or an industry. Now that's the absolute power that Vvdaul was talking about. So talk to me a little bit about structural power as you know it, Vvdaul. I know this is your jam.
Yeah, structural power, when I'm talking to my young people about this, the first thing I want to impress upon them is the absolute necessity of knowing history, because that's where absolute power is recorded. The fact that in America, we only learn parts of pieces of narratives is because our government has absolute power over our education system. One of the biggest examples of that, even at the the conflict of institutional and structural power in America, depending on completely where you live, your zip code, you may learn about the American Civil War, you may learn about the War of Northern Aggression. And that in itself creates structures in the way that you're indoctrinated through public education. And I want to be very clear, that's something that happens in public American schools in 2021, is everyone does not learn the truth of this country. And so that structural power is a historical narrative that sets the tone for how we navigate. It governs, literally, that word government is in the definition because it overrides everything else as far as power. You know, unfortunately, we can all we want to change particular systems like criminal justice system. But until we actually get structural shifts in the way that we fund federal prisons, in the way that we look at criminal justice, the way that we fund police stations locally, the way that we look at policing nationally, until those narratives are addressed on that level structurally, you're just putting band-aids on things. And so when I think again about how to antagonize structural change, it's doing your research, knowing what the structures are. Like, it's not sufficient to know that, for instance, here in Oregon, we're working on Black student success. That's the institutional conversation, is how do we get Oregon public schools to be more equitable to Black communities and Black students, right? The structural piece to that is we absolutely must change the way we fund. We absolutely must change the way that we create, and we must absolutely change the way that we sustain education in this state. But then again,
and what are the intersecting institutions that also perpetuate the same behaviors, and how do we address those as well?
Yeah, and really the hard part about structural change is, especially when, you know, we work in education, the hard part is half of what we deal with is federal policy, half of what we deal with is local state policy. And we know that those are usually in conflict.
They're almost always in conflict, which is so funny to me, but hey, we try to navigate and find loopholes. We're like little lawyers walking around.
Which is the importance of knowing your history, knowing what the policies are, and being able to advocate beyond them. And so I know we're also, that's the fight the power section, but that advocacy piece is really what pushes structural change.
Right.
It's chipping away at something so big, because otherwise you're gonna bite off more than you can really chew. And like you said, there's systems that intersect, there's systems you didn't even know were at play. Right. And you don't want to get caught up in a power struggle that you weren't prepared for. So understand that structural power is that absolute power that literally governs our lives. And it's important to know what that is, be able to name it, and then figure out ways you and your collective power can antagonize those systems.
Yes. Listen, I thought we weren't going to put on our scuba gear yet, but we have, ladies and gentlemen, and those who are non-binary, listen, we have put on our scuba gear and we are diving deep, guys. We are deep. We are so deep right now. Vvdaul, man, you know, I know that in this moment, thinking about structural power. We're always strategizing around these things, especially because we are practitioners of this work and trying to antagonize structural powers to benefit a more equitable ecosystem, a more equitable structural system. And so when I think about it, I don't want you guys to get defeated in this. Like, Vvdaul literally gave us the hope. The hope is that we understand types of power so that we can capitalize on those types of power to antagonize structural power, right? Like, understand that this is not, no one should feel defeated in this. Everyone should feel empowered because now you understand what the types of power are and how you can utilize them to your benefit in a positive, righteous, and equitable way. Like, we're not championing anybody who wants to do bad things. No, we're righteous, we're equitable, and we're doing it the right way. We're utilizing our power and our privilege, our collective power to help one another. Which brings me to community and justice, right? Like, social power and social justice is very important, right? So thank you for bringing us to this. I mean, I feel like it's just perfect. So according to the National Conference for Community and Justice, social power is the access to resources that enhance one's chances of getting what one needs in order to lead a comfortable, productive, and safe life. So that's the end goal for us, guys. We understand politics, we understand power, we know that there are different types of power, but the goal is to have social power so that people can have access to resources so they can live a comfortable, productive, safe, and thriving life, okay? And so social justice, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it's justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within society. So once we understand the politics and the power structures, and we understand that we want social power, we want to use that as capital so that we can achieve social justice. So the distribution of wealth and opportunities and privileges within our society are equitable and everyone has opportunity to access it. That is our goal. Okay, guys, that is the goal. So Vvdaul, I just want to close out on this section, and I would love to hear you, just talk to us a little bit about power versus position. We talked about this in the beginning. We have laid our foundation. So explain to us, what is power versus position at this point for you?
So when I talk about power versus position, it's really the understanding of who you are as an individual and the space you occupy as that individual. So position, for instance, I am a Black male. I live in Oregon, but I'm from Arkansas. So that positionality creates a particular way that I navigate, right? And then now I'm a holder of 2 graduate degrees. That gives me privilege in a space that creates a new position for me. Now I'm working in philanthropy, in advocacy of education versus working in the education system. That gives me another position to advocate from. And so it's really about this game of chess, and think about it as a chessboard as the end game of social justice. And what you really want to be doing is every time you move a piece, you're understanding the position and how that power changes. So you move your knight. Now your knight's in front of a rook. Now your knight can take that rook, it can take that pawn. It's about understanding when you move that position, did you put your knight in danger? Or did you occupy space to help your kingdom or your community? And so it's really about always thinking and knowing and understanding where you fit in a particular organization, community, institution, structure. I'm very aware that at the end of the day, all these degrees, all this education does not take away my Black male identity. So everything that comes with the negative stereotypes of being a Black man, I carry that.
Right.
That's part of my positionality. However, my power is that now I know that I can navigate accordingly. I can know the laws of the criminal justice system. I can know the laws of my local city ordinances. I can understand who my local councilmen are so that when something does happen at the behest of one of those stereotypes, I can undo that learning real quick.
Right.
Or, as we like to say, I will read you for filth real quick.
Boo-boo.
And so at that point, now my positionality has allowed me to overcome whatever negative might be about my community through my own power.
Right.
And when I think about position and power from the collective community sense, it's really about mass numbers. And so what we saw after the murder of George Floyd was this positional shift. Like Black people been tired of getting murdered by police. Like we that's been.
I don't know anybody who needed to know that again.
You see what I'm saying? Like if
but yes.
Slave capture laws were enforced by police. So from the legacy of slavery, Black people ain't been fooling with the police. Nope. But 2020 was a position shift for white America.
And white corporations in America.
That part. Mm-hmm. And that changed the power dynamics. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about that, I will forever be like, hey, summer 2020, that was one of the triggers that shifted position and gained a collective power to where even if we wanted to, we can't go back to pre-2020. The pandemic and George Floyd changed that. So now we must address these systems and these structures from a community level. And so it's really about, like I said, I look at it as a chessboard. And every piece, you can move it, take power, lose power, maintain power, collect power, but understand that you can also lose this game, win this game. It's about understanding what you got, who your people are, and how y'all can move forward on a board.
Right. So I want to encourage everybody right now to understand George Floyd's murder will not go in vain. There are a lot of people who are trying to move away from it and as if it didn't happen, as if it was just another scroll in a timeline. No, it was not. People were severely harmed by his murder. And quite frankly, I've been doing a little bit of research. There have been a lot of lynchings around the world and in this country since then that have not been reported. 5 of them, which I want to talk about. I want to have like a very comprehensive conversation about it, but I'm trying to lay foundation. I don't want to just throw so many things at everyone, but there's been a lot of retaliation because of that shift in America as it pertains to people of color in this country and their safety. And so I want us to really understand that George Floyd is not something that was yesterday. It's today, this very day, this very conversation. It's not something that just gets to dissipate. And we have to do better. We have to do better and we have to be dedicated. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are operations, organizations, corporations, startup companies. Please understand, DEI, JEDI, and belonging are operations. They are everyday operations. They are not just separate departments. They are not consultants. They are not one-person departments, a director, a manager. They are everyday operations and should be infused into every position within your organization. This is institutional change, and that's what we're looking for.
And I would just like to add, for organizations and institutions that truly want to do the work of JEDI, understand that means you must give up some of your power. Like that is the underlying piece here is if you want to do DEI and maintain your current power structure, you don't want to do DEI. You want to make people of color feel more comfortable. And those are 2 separate conversations. So I just want to put that out there that doing the work of DEI is actionable steps towards recreating equitable power structures. If power does not shift, you have not done the work.
You better preach. I could end this right here. I can end this. Y'all done? Because listen, he just dropped it like it's hot. First of all, stop just being in line. Listen, you just spoke truth to power. How about that? Okay. All right. So we're going into our second part of our agenda. And we're talking about speaking truth to power. Now I'm going to give you guys another learning session, because I don't want to put any terms out there, any what's the word I'm looking for? Phrases out there that you just don't understand. And like I said, shameless social media plug. Follow us at imanaborenainc on Instagram. We have learning sessions, and a learning session was speaking truth to power, and we gave you the definition. So speaking truth to power is an expression that we use to describe courageously confronting an authority, a gatekeeper, or those who hold oppressive structures while boldly calling out the injustices that happen on their watch and demanding change. This is speaking truth to power, and I'm putting so much passion behind it because I feel like this is where we are as a society for those of us who are actually interested in structural and institutional change. Okay? We're courageously confronting and we're boldly calling out injustice. Okay? And I feel like I want to empower everybody to want to be on the same wave, because we can all do it positively, with healing, with information and knowledge, with the sharing of information and knowledge, and with practices that are equitable and inclusive, with policy analysis and understanding procedural ways that we carry out procedures. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm losing the word. But the ways in which we carry out procedures, it's very important for us to understand this. So speak truth to power. So Vvdaul, you spoke truth to power just now, right? But you also used the phrase speaking truth to power, and I saw you snap. So what does this mean to you?
When I think of speaking truth to power, the first thing that comes to mind is being willing to stand in the gap of a situation where you are experiencing an injustice. And when I say stand in the gap, I say it's that idea of reducing the harm. So let's say there's an act of inequity or injustice happening in front of you. It's standing in a space to block that harm from being passed through. And that can be something as small as changing the subject. It can be something as large as dropping the mic, being like, hey, actually, research says you're full of crap. This is what the numbers are actually pointing towards, and that's really about a comfort and building your own personal style of speaking truth to power. But it's really about interrupting and antagonizing inequality and injustice as it's occurring.
Mm-hmm. I love it. As it's occurring, guys, you have to be bold. That's why I said I want to encourage you guys. I said it like that because I'm like, I hope it shakes somebody up in this moment. Like, man, I can do this, because we're going to talk about how a young professional, or even a professional in general, can speak truth to power. How can we do this? Like, I know we have to interrupt it in the moment while it's happening, but what if I'm timid? What if I don't have the words? Like, what do I do to get to a space where I can interrupt it in the moment?
And for my timid homies in the back, what I will say to you is it's okay to be timid. What's not okay is silence. I don't care if it takes you 10 minutes to play the script in your head on how you're going to antagonize the injustice. It's the fact that you eventually do. I think a lot of the times we'll say we're timid, we're nervous, I'm not good at confrontation, and those are ultimately excuses to remain silent. So I challenge timid people, or those who are nervous or shy speakers or don't like conflict, to really understand that that's part of the action of being a Jedi professional, is you have to move beyond your own discomfort to progress the community. Again, that chessboard, you might have to sacrifice some of your comfort on this board to get checkmate. And that's okay. That's the game we're in. But I would say for our more timid folks, hey, we need you just like we need our more vocal bold homies. And for the bold homies, again, it's all about how you finesse. Like, maybe you're comfortable enough to just be like, not for me. But maybe you need that space to be like, hey, this got said earlier and I want to address it. It's about finding your lane and occupying that lane, but ultimately not sitting in silence is what I would.
Silence is complicit.
And in a lot of ways, silence perpetuates violence. Like I can't imagine or even recount the amount of times I've been in the space of being marginalized, and I have no choice but to speak truth to power, because otherwise no one's going to do it for me. And then I have my white counterparts who will email me later and say, oh, that was so bold. So thank you for saying it. I was thinking that. And it's like, that silence did nothing but create more violence towards me, because now I'm out here on this island by myself. Imagine that collective social power had someone else even co-signed what I said, you know, or like, I agree with it. And so it's really not always being the one who stands in front, but occupying a space that blocks them.
Not to cut you off, Vvdaul, I just want to talk to my white folks real quick about this. By no means do we not understand that you have an affinity and your affinity space can out you, right? So there is a fear that comes along with being the individual that speaks and advocates on behalf of the other from your affinity space. I understand that there's a fear that comes with that, and I empathize with that. However, I want my white folks to understand that you hold privilege in these spaces when you're witnessing this violence that is happening towards someone who comes from a historically ignored community. And when you don't speak up in that moment, you're telling that perpetrator that you're okay with their actions. Sending an email afterwards to someone who was harmed, that actually harms them more. That feels like violence as well. You speaking up in the moment and advocating feels like support. The support you actually want to give, I encourage you to speak up in the moment instead of waiting and being passive and being silent and being afraid. Because yes, your affinity space may out you, but the privilege that is attached to your existence provides you some leverage that they literally can't out you. So you really have a lot of power in that. And I always implore my white folks, my white friends, my colleagues, the people that I meet, I implore you, use your privilege in positive ways in spaces where you can witness and see that people of color are being harmed, or people who come from historically ignored communities are being harmed, marginalized people are being harmed. Use your privilege in that moment. It means more than you know. All right, Vvdaul, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you captured the sentiment. It's, again, I want people to understand that, and again, we're talking specifically about Jedi professionals, right? So if you consider yourself to be justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging professional in any context of that phrase, it's about understanding you can no longer sit in silence. Nope. It's actually in direct conflict with how you identify as a Jedi professional. So I appreciate you giving that context, because I don't want it to sound like I'm only talking about white colleagues. Something I probably should mention is I purposely only work in predominantly white institutions. So that's how I choose to navigate through my advocacy lanes, is to go into these predominantly white institutions and create conversations and change. So my lens, I am talking about white colleagues. However, this can be Black, brown, blue, purple, pink, doesn't matter. If you're calling yourself a Jedi professional and you're witnessing an injustice and you don't stand in the gap to interrupt it, you've now participated in that. So I really just want y'all to understand that speaking truth to power is not optional. I know it sounds like, oh, this is something I need to learn to do, but it's like, no, you need to learn to get comfortable doing it consistently.
Right.
It's not a oh, I can do this or I can't do this. It's you must do this in order to be a Jedi professional. Because everyone does not claim that identity. Let's be very clear. There are people who work in education and do not champion social change, equity, inclusion at all. And so if you consider yourself to be one of those people who do champion these things, it is absolutely critical that you just grow a comfort in your personal style of speaking truth to power.
Right. So and curating your personal style along the way, right? Like you said, so your timid homies in the back or the ones who are very vocal, you have a skill set and some strengths as it pertains to Jedi and belonging. And that's why you're dedicated to it. So utilizing those strengths is imperative. Not to cut you off, I'm sorry. That's the second time I've done that.
No, that's literally my wrap up. That was my point.
Okay, I'm sorry. I said, do not cut this man off. And I did it twice. I take accountability for my actions. I'm just very, very excited to be talking to you and like just talking about this work, because I know there are people who are questioning, they're wondering like, how do I do this? How do I speak? Lean on your skill set, lean on your strengths. If you're the type of person that does really well with policy, sign up for that committee and address that policy. Right? You don't have to be as vocal. I'm a vocal individual, right? Vvdaul, sometimes you're vocal, you pick and choose when you feel like being. But me, I'm in your face. No, that didn't like it. But that's because like I spent so much time doing the research that I'm comfortable speaking it out, talking about it and standing in the gap. I've even, been, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I've been reprimanded for speaking out, ostracized. No, like reprimanded. I had to go to HR. I had to do all these things because I spoke out about someone being harassed in the environment, and I spoke out about how toxic the environment was for a person of color, and I was reprimanded for that. So you have to, when Vvdaul says stand in the gap, you got to pick and choose. Perhaps you're not somebody who's going to speak out like me and risk your position. But for you, you might analyze a policy and provide feedback on that policy so that it becomes more equitable. So utilize your skill set and utilize your strengths when you're speaking truth to power. And for my white folks, when you're in the room, please use your privilege. Use it. Speak out. Don't send that email to the person of color or that person who comes from the LGBTQ plus community or that accessible person. Don't send them an email later on that does not feel good. That's not support. It feels like you were complicit in the moment, you felt guilty, and now you want to put your guilt on me. Don't do that. We can't do anything with your guilt, but we can do something with your privilege and your advocacy, and that's where we need to be. So Vvdaul, we are like coming up on an hour. I don't want to keep you too long. So we're going to jump into Fight the Powers That Be. And we're just going to go over, so The Mystery of Iniquity by Lauryn Hill. I mean, shout out to Lauryn. Like Lauryn is just
iconic.
Listen, I seen her in concert. I don't mean to make you guys jealous, but we were on Jones Beach at the concert hall. And like, she's on stage and I'm overlooking the water. It was really nice. And she was on time, guys. So don't talk about my girl being on time. Yes, she came for 3 hours after we got there, but she was on time.
No, man.
Leave my girl alone. I mean, it took her 3 hours to get there. I'm not gonna lie. We got there at what? We got there at 7. She didn't get on till 11. And then she got off at 12. But you know what? I don't let me tell you something. She's Lauryn Hill, okay?
Right.
She can do whatever she wants. And she had great acts before that. So it wasn't like you were bored or anything. I don't know if you guys know who MIA is. She had been banned from America, and this was her first time being back in America. So a lot of iconic things happened that night. But my girl, Lauryn Hill, shout out to you, girl. I love you dearly. Me and my sister, we love you. So, Vvdaul, Mystery of Iniquity. So you love this song.
I do.
And so we took a lyric from the song, and I want us to react to the lyric.
Okay.
All right. So I'm not a rapper, but I'm going to try my best because I got the mic. Emotional victim blackmailed by the henchmen, framed by intentions, inventions whereby they lynch men. So we'll let that sink in.
You know,
let me say it again. Let me say it again for the people in the back. Emotional victim blackmailed by the henchmen, framed by intentions, inventions whereby they lynch men.
Before I even respond to that lyric, if you're watching this and you have never heard that song, listen to the full song. Yes. You're asleep if you've never heard this song. Like,
yes,
give yourself.
We need you to be woke.
Yeah. I want to start with emotional victim blackmailed by the henchman. This, I think, speaks to the core of what we've been talking about with power. The image of the emotional victim blackmailed by the henchman. So, talking about power in a wider sense, we as people have been emotionally victimized by structural policies and systems that we come in contact with on our daily lives. And I'm not just talking about like police and criminal justice. We're talking about food, like agriculture, our air quality,
housing,
yes,
voting,
our water, like stuff.
Water, like, yes.
Like there's so many structures that create victimization, and it takes a generational toll, but it takes a definitely emotional toll. And it's almost to the idea that as a collective of victims, we have this social power, but we're being blackmailed by a system that tells us that we don't deserve these things. Like the image that comes to my mind is, you know, when I spent time in Navajo Nation in Mexico. These are some of the most historically oppressed people in the history of the world, but definitely in the history of America and the United States as we know it. And they have continually been victimized to the point where even in a modern society, they do not have the basic necessities. There's no federal aid out there really supporting these people. Like, let's be honest, they were sent to the middle of the desert to die.
Right.
No, our structures did not expect them to live and thrive and continue. So there's this constant blackmailing of, well, we gave you land, you have reservations, you have these things, what's the issue? Like, it's almost like gaslighting you to your own death.
Which brings us to framed by intentions. The intention is to blackmail you. It is to keep you emotionally, physically, mentally, psychologically oppressed.
Yeah.
And strip you of every bit of your identity to the point where you feel like you're nothing.
And that's the literal lynching. Like, that's the metaphysical lynching that's being talked about here, is that you get so low and destitute that you feel there is no way up. The only way up is out. And it's that intention of out is like death by design. The out is, oh, I'm going to go sell these drugs. Criminal justice system got you.
Right.
The out is, oh, I'm going to go get all these fancy degrees, but now you got a lot of debt to carry.
Right.
Like, there's all these ways that the system frames and keeps you in this victimization that ultimately leads to one of our social myths. Yeah. And so I think that's probably one of the most powerful points in that song in a long series of powerful images.
Yes. Trust me, it took us forever to just pick this one. It was so hard to pick something. You guys really have to listen to this song. And I know we just put on some Scooby Gear and got deep, but go ahead, Vvdaul. I'm sorry about that.
No, I get almost emotional like about this idea that, especially as an oppressed folk, and when I not to, like you said, not to put on the scuba gear, but to understand that when I'm talking about Blackness, I am not naming monolithic African American identities. I'm talking about a full diaspora of displaced people.
Yes.
So that's everybody. Like, I just want to be clear. When I say Black, that's everybody. There is almost a willful ignorance in the community to uplift some parts of that victimization and ignore others. And so it creates this have and have nots where now we're fighting internally for resources that really we should be antagonizing systems to give us. And that's
guys, if you go back to my Policing Blackness, I talked about Willie Lynch's Letter to a Slave. It was the framework on slave domestication and the psychological warfare that was unleashed on displaced people in the world, because at the time it was the global slave trade, and the same frameworks are being perpetuated today. And these are the frameworks that Vvdaul is referring to. So if you have some time, go back and watch Policing Blackness. I think it's episode 2. Sorry, Vvdaul.
No. And then I want to also emphasize in my reaction the use of the term henchman. Again, because one of the first things I said at the beginning of this podcast was the intentionality of words and the understanding of nuance between connotation and denotation. Yes. So I ask you a question, Charlene. When you hear henchman, what is the image that's created for you?
When I hear henchman, I always think about the mob and the ones who are like underneath the boss, who carry out the desires of the boss, so the boss never gets his hands dirty. So when I think about the henchmen, I think about the elites in this country who create the structures and the politicians that carry out their desires, blindly carry them out so they could never get their hands dirty. Like how we use that example about big pharma and big tech driving structural power in this country, institutional power in this country. They never get their hands dirty, but the politicians are the ones carrying out the policies and the procedures. So that's what I think about.
And I'm so glad that that's the way you described it, because again, it's literally the henchman, as far as a definition, is no different from assistant, right? Like they help carry out a particular project goal, but the contextual understanding of henchman has a negative understanding, and there's almost a nefarious, like, ulterior motive to it. Like there's an evilness.
Yes, very evil.
And I think about that in the context of the mystery of iniquity, in that there are literal henchmen carrying out structures. There are literal people who mean you no well. No good. No peace. No good. Who set structures in this country. And that is a very disconcerting idea. Like when you think about it on a macro level, but that's the reality of this country. It was built by people who did not even consider Blackness to qualify you as citizens. So you cannot,
or even a whole person, like you were a quarter of an individual.
And so and again, I should say, if you've never heard the song, please do yourself that favor. But one of the other lyrics that I think connects well to this is when she's questioning, do we expect a system made for the elect to properly serve, protect? And it's like, of course not. Like, of course, when you pose it like that, of course, a system that was not made for you will not serve and protect you. And so that's really about power and position. It's this idea that you have henchmen carrying out deeds by this nefarious floating government entity mob boss, and their actions never reflect directly onto the government, right? But it has direct impact for you because of your position in that power structure. And so it's just Lauryn Hill, and if you don't know much about Lauryn Hill, this is one of the songs that really people say kind of ruined her career, because she took a whole song to speak truth to power from not just a political perspective, but a Christian Black perspective.
Oh, yes. The rest of the song is absolutely mind-blowing. Yes.
And so this is literally a way of antagonizing power and speaking truth to power by using lyrics in a song. You know, Lauryn Hill wasn't at the protest, but this is one of the most iconic songs in hip hop protest lineage.
Right.
And it's from like the early 2000s. Like, this is a older song.
But and she stood in the gap and was willing to lose her career of being at the top
to tell the truth.
To tell the truth.
And so I think this song really embodies what power is in America, who holds the power, and takes a whole image of how to question that power.
Right.
So I think it really does encompass this conversation. That's my reaction to it.
Vvdaul, I mean, this has been such a pleasure. I don't know about you guys, but I'm 100% blessed on today. Like, I mean, we put on some scuba gear. We really did. We got deep. A lot of these conversations might be triggering for some people. I encourage you to continue in your research. Look up the songs, look up the sites that we gave you, look up the terminologies that we gave you. Think more critically about what was shared with you. Don't just take this information as fact. Go and find out your own facts for yourself, okay? Cite yourself. But I want to close out with this, Vvdaul. This is my last question to you. I want to thank you, though. Thank you so much for coming on Black and Beautiful Chit Chat Connections and being a part of this web. So fight the powers that be. So my last question to you as we close out. Can we deconstruct what we know as power in this country?
That is a huge closing question.
I know. Now, the reason why I asked it, right, is because I'm not expecting you to fully answer it.
Okay, good.
You can say yes or no with a little supporting evidence, and we leave them on a cliffhanger because I plan on having part 2.
So, can you give me that question one more time?
Can we deconstruct what we know as power in this country?
I am going to say yes, but only if we achieve collective understanding of how to move beyond these structures. So basically, what happens next?
Wonderful answer. And the answer I kind of expected, because that's how I feel. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. That does it for our first part of Fight the Power. Thank you, Vvdaul, for gracing us with your knowledge. You are so amazing. May God bless you, keep you, and just continue to give you all the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding so that you can continue to be just amazing in your field and change people's lives. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you again next week, 8 p.m. imanaborenainc. Follow us on any platform that you love. Link below in the description box and hit that subscribe button, yo. We need you. We need you to subscribe so you can be a part of our Black and Beautiful family. We love you. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.